All right, folks, welcome back to another incredible edition of the Summer Series. And have we got a great story for you? We are talking to a property investor who has shown little different ways to actually skin the cat here for her to build her portfolio. It's incredible. What else are we going to cover, Ben?
Oh, mate, this is a story of money independence. It's about taking charge, taking action, and being in control. That feeling of being in control, Bryce.
It is a ripper, folks. Stick around. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, Chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to another edition of the Summer Series here on the Property Couch podcast. And Ben, have we got another wonderful guest today as we start to get used to being in summer 2 weeks in?
Ooh. Yeah, I love this story. This is a story where, again, there's a bit of a theme in the last couple of weeks about just sort of people not on big incomes, doing great work. I mean, this is a story of a teacher who works in the local, community, and they don't earn huge incomes. But they still find a way. They have determination. They're not going to be a victim. They're going to basically take action. They're going to drive that story forward. So I really loved our chat with Jessica.
It is a terrific story, folks. We are going to cut to that conversation we had now with Jessica Smythe. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today. Super excited to chat through this in another episode of the Summer Series. We are talking with podcast listener Jessica Smythe. Welcome to the Property Couch, Jessica.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. We're excited to have you on. Lots to chat about, lots of rabbit warrens that I'm sure we're going to go down with your particular story. But let's start it at the top, where we always go. Jessica, you probably knew this question was coming, but tell us a little bit about money when you were growing up. What conversations weren't happening at the dinner table when you were growing up?
Okay, so I think that's, for me, definitely one of the most powerful indicators of where I am. And that's because I come from a really wonderful, loving family who obviously were terrible at managing money. Money caused a lot of stress between my parents in my household. Both of my parents had been married previously and had children to other marriages, and then got married and had my younger sister and I. So there was 4 girls in the house, and there was a lot of talk of bills. And yeah, my parents fought about money, which was extremely stressful for me and my younger sister. I'm so grateful that I've had the parents that I've had, because I've had a wonderful childhood. But in terms of being smart with money, it's not something that I came to until later on in my life.
Now, Jessica, I had a similar upbringing. I've publicly mentioned that with my folks. I've had a wonderful upbringing, but also the debate around essential and discretionary money was where our arguments often landed about having so much versus, not enough and those types of things. It wasn't ultimately not being able to pay the bills. It was more a discussion of delayed gratification versus, do we really need something, or is it a need or a want? Tell us a little bit more about that for you. Was it that the bills were getting struggled to be paid, or you grew up with more of trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak?
It definitely wasn't trying to keep up with the Joneses, but I was one of those children who was absolutely horse mad. All I wanted was a horse, and there was no way that my parents could possibly afford to have a horse. Anyone who knows anything about horses will know that they are a depreciating asset. A lot of money goes in and not a lot of money comes back out again. So when I was 12, I started doing a paper run, and this is really where my understanding about saving came from, because I saved for years. I did a paper run for a year. I washed cars. I got a job at KFC. I did whatever I could to save as much money as I possibly could. And I got lucky and I brought my first horse, but that was all I had. I didn't have a bridle or a saddle or anything like that. But I got there in the end, and it was quite a powerful lesson for me. But my parents weren't really in a position to support me in the way that I wanted to be. I wanted to be a show jumper, and that's the kind of thing that you really need to have a significant amount of disposable income for, which wasn't something that we had.
But there's some massive lessons in that story, right? Because ultimately, that's a determination, it's goal setting, it's saving up towards that goal. Tell me about your parents and their response to that, in terms of that they saw you working hard, paper run, KFC, doing the car washing. Yeah. Did they get behind you, or were they sort of saying, is it really what you want? Did they try and talk you out of it? Tell me a bit about that story.
No, they were very supportive. I mean, I guess you would both know as parents yourselves, you do a lot of driving around of your children to their various things. And so I always had their support, but it certainly was something that was difficult to take to the next level. And, you know, it didn't ever really go to the next level. I think I sold my last horse when I was 17 or 18. And I haven't brought another one since.
So you scratched that itch and then worked out that there's, you know, you couldn't get to that next level. And so it was just a matter of, I need to refocus my priorities, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because, you know, you're 17, 18 years of age and various things are going on. But if I wanted to go down the path of being a horse rider, it would have sort of meant taking a very certain path, particularly, you know, working for other people. Yeah. You don't earn a lot of money in that. So it wasn't something that ultimately I did, but I learned a lot from it.
Yeah.
Jessica, can we lean in on, you said that there was fights about money and that was stressful for you and your sister. Can we get a little sense of what how that stress came about? How did you wear that stress? What was it like, and how did you respond to those stressful times?
I really hated asking my parents for money. I really hated it, asking them for money, because I knew that it was I knew that they couldn't just give it to us. My parents shopped in the op shop for clothes, which now is totally cool, but back then it was not. Yeah. And, you know, I felt really embarrassed about that. So I liked having my own money and being able to be as independent as possible. And that's something that's driven me my whole life, despite some, I don't want to say errors, I'm going to say learning experiences along the way. I've always been financially independent, and I really thank my parents for giving that to me.
And you got the job at 12, you started saving. What did that saving look like for you? Was there certain elements that you could learn from your parents, or was there a grandparent or so? Where were you learning the skills on where to put that money and what to set the goal for?
I put it in a jar to start with. And then I remember getting my first bank account with the Newcastle Permanent, actually, and I'm still with them. I have all my mortgages through them now, which is not because I'm a unquestioning loyal customer. It's just happened to be that they have always come out at number one. So I started putting it in the bank when you had a little passbook and you had to have it stamped. I really got a lot of satisfaction out of seeing my bank account go up, even though, you know, when you're doing a paper run, I think it was something like 12 cents a paper. It wasn't a lot of money. But yeah, no, that really was satisfying to me, having it there in those accounts. I've still got that same account. It's my same account now.
Is it an offset account now, or is it still?
It is 100% offset account.
All right, what's to move to an offset? That's pretty cool. Hey, I want to lean in on that. Hated asking for money, and ultimately you worked out really early that there's a money independence story going on here.
Yes.
What the greatest gift your parents gave you was the fact that you didn't grow up with any abundance, that there wasn't much surplus, and ultimately you worked out. And so that's my question. What was the age that you really did finally work out that if it is to be, it's up to me, and this whole money independence is going to be my responsibility?
Early, I think really early. I'm going to say probably as early as sort of 13 or 14. Yeah. But by the time I was 17, I was pretty much financially independent.
Now, question without notice around obviously your three other sisters.
Yeah.
How do you all grew up in the same family environment? Are they consistent with you on that front, or are they spenders or savers? Or tell us a little bit about, because again, same environment,
Yeah.
but I'm predicting that there's going to be different mindsets here.
Yeah, I think for my sisters, we're all very hard workers and we all have a hard work ethic. And this is something that's one of the things that the podcast has transformed for me is it doesn't matter if you're a really hard worker, if you don't understand those principles of how money works, you can work as hard as you like and you'll make choices that mean that you just keep working hard and there isn't that reward. So I think that's something that I've probably got a little bit more than my sisters. And I mean, we're all very different.
Yeah.
And we've had different life circumstances and things happen along the way. And I do think that can really impact on your ability to be able to hone in and focus on this. I don't have any children. I've been able to focus very much on property, whereas that's not necessarily the case for my other sisters.
Yeah, the decisions and the trade-offs that we are making around those types of things, and some things with out of our control forced upon us. A lot of other things that are in our control, making those judgment calls and those trade-offs about how we prioritise financials. And obviously, having children is one of the greatest rewards one could ever have. But there is the trade-off that with them comes obviously a huge commitment of money. But outside of that, yeah, he's exactly right. I mean, ultimately the journey that we take and then take the best opportunities that we've got is also an important message here as well.
Yes.
You hit on a really good point too, Jessica, about that hard work, and I think I've been thinking about it a lot myself lately. Is we've all really got 16 hours in a day, all of us, because we've got 8 hours to sleep, and we all sort of probably agree that the more that you sneak into the 8 hours of sleep, the less your quality of life is. So the hard work isn't the measuring stick of getting ahead. It's the level of output that you can actually get from those 16 hours. And so there's people who work super hard who get less output than people who don't work as hard. So the measuring stick shouldn't be, geez, I'm battling away, I'm working hard. It should be, how can I incrementally improve the amount of output that I'm getting from these hours? And I guess that's, it's nice for you to say the podcast has helped that, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to add leverage of skills and leverage of assets and leverage of finance, and using other forms of leverage other than trading time for money for you to get outcomes that you're chasing. So it's a good point that you've highlighted there. I'm glad that the Property Couch has had a hand in that for you.
Yes.
So you obviously, we've talked backstory around growing up, teenage years. Take us to first independent full-time job, and what did that look like, and what did your money behaviours look like when you started getting bigger pay packets?
Okay, so I went to uni a little bit later. I worked in hospitality. I worked in really low-paying jobs before I went to uni, and I worked really hard. I worked long hours, and there wasn't a lot of, like, the cost of living. When you're in that situation, I think that's one of the things that I can really empathise with people. It's just not that simple to get out of that situation. I learned a lot from being underpaid in hospitality. It was actually, in hindsight, a very valuable experience to watch my boss get extremely wealthy off the back of, hard labour of the young staff who were working there. I went to uni. I think I started when I was 21, and I did a teaching degree. I did a double degree, Bachelor of Teaching, Bachelor of Arts. And then when I came out of uni, I was sort of ready to go, and my partner at the time said, "Do you want to move to Bangalow?" And I said, "Where's Bangalow?" I'd never heard of it before. And we were looking between Bellingen and Bangalow, and both of those, there was sort of pros and cons to both, but looking at Bangalow, it's quite central, and you've got a really vast array of schools in a, you know, within an hour's drive. So, and there's also an airport close by. You've got Ballina Airport, you've got Lismore Airport, you've got Gold Coast Airport, and you've got Brisbane Airport. So actually, and airports have been a bit of a theme for me with looking at other properties later on, because you've got accessibility. And so we chose Bangalow, and I started working, and at that time I was with, you know, my partner and my stepdaughter, and we built a house. So my money went into my family and building this beautiful house in Bangalow, which that sadly didn't last. And it's interesting now, and you guys talk about it all the time, you know, what a property is worth now. We sold, and it would be worth at least double of what we sold it for. It was 2016, I think. And out of that, I walked away with just about nothing. I still had a HECS debt. I had no savings, and we weren't separating as quickly as what we could have. So it was quite expensive. And we had a large mortgage, which, you know, to me now means nothing, because I just look at that asset that we had. It was also our family home. And I walked away with nothing, with my tail between my legs going, oh my God, like here I am at, I think I was 26, 25, 27, 32. I can't remember. Hold on. 32. And walking away going, I've worked so hard my entire life and I have nothing to show for it. Yes.
And how did that make you feel at that moment?
It was a pretty tough time, and I had this fantastic job. I got a full-time permanent job in Byron Bay, teaching in a wonderful school. So I had that. I was further on down the pay scale, so it certainly wasn't easy, and just trying to recover financially. But I got really lucky. A friend of mine said to me, there's a little development happening, and I think the developer, it's the first stage, and I think they'll take a $5,000 deposit. I didn't have $5,000, and my mum lent me $5,000, and that probably would have been close to all the money that she had. And I don't know if she would have done that for my other sisters, but because I've always been good with money, she lent me this $5,000, and I went to the agent and said, you know, I offered them a bit less for the block of land, and he said no. And I said, okay, well, will they take a $5,000 deposit until I settle in my separation? And they said yes. So that was it was a massive stroke of luck. There was a lot of bravery involved, because just even offering someone $5,000 as a deposit is, you know, intimidating. But yeah, that's really the lucky thing that happened for me, that just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And luckily, it took for ages for that land to get registered. And in that time, I settled. I walked away from my separation with barely any money. I paid my HECS debt. I paid my mum back, and I paid the solicitor, and I didn't have any money left. I got my first ever credit card and paid for the stamp duty, which at the time there was a discount for people who said that they would build within 12 months. And so I got this first ever credit card and paid the stamp duty with that. The land still hadn't registered. And so I was just able to keep saving and start thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do when this land does register? Because I had a very limited borrowing capacity. And the land just kept going up in value. So,
which is wonderful that it stayed going up in value in your name, because there's plenty of stories where people do that, and then the developer uses a sunset clause to get out because they used you to get funding, and then they abuse you to say, well, they've gone up, I want to profit some more. So it's wonderful that you were able to keep that equity growth in your name. And there's more to this story, but I'm interested in a lot more. Yeah, a lot more, right? So, but your financial literacy at that time, like, it sounds like you're stepping out in faith here, and to a certain extent, just really trusting in the process. But how would you have graded your financial literacy at this point in time when you handed over that $5,000?
I'd say my financial literacy was actually, I don't want to say poor, because I think I just had habits early on from, having the horses. But I didn't understand. I didn't understand at all. I really had no understanding. That's something that came when I'd already, committed to buying this land. In some ways that freaked me out a little bit, because I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I've made this huge financial commitment, and I can't even afford to build a house on it.
Yeah. But in terms of day-to-day money management, Jess, were you, you're pretty good there, right? Like ultimately you knew exactly what your commitments were. You had a good line of sight on essential and discretionary spending. And so from that point of view, so probably where you're rating yourself is knowing that the mechanics of mortgages and how all that sort of works. Is that fair to say?
That's very true. And I think that's something that you guys have taught me so much about, the actual tools and skills. I think initially what I was already sort of there, and I had this half house, but it gave me faith that, okay, this is going to be okay, and these are the skills that I need to work with what I've got here. One thing I'd like to say, I think, to listeners is that I've always owned my car. That's something that my parents were like, never, ever get a loan to buy a car. You own your car, you pay for it. And I think that actually, even though it's not explicitly good financial advice, it actually is excellent financial advice. So I learned you don't ever borrow money for a depreciating asset, and that's probably why I still don't have any horses.
Maybe one day for horses. Though. There is definitely, as you get over the hill and you come up to the peak of the mountain and financial peace, there are some future choices you can have.
Think about what you did, Jessica, is you had a plane that you needed to assemble, and you jumped off the cliff and you assembled it on the way down, and and kind of had the faith that you weren't going to hit the ground. You at some point you'll assemble the plane, and I think there is a lesson in that. We don't want people to take overt risks that are not calculated, but you were trying to buy some land. That's a good thing. You were, a little money down, and the fact that you were able to secure that equity growth in your name is incredible. What does half a house mean in that part of the story?
Well, this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting. And going back to that jumping off a cliff, it wasn't totally jumping off a cliff, because what I still do it now. I go, what is the worst possible outcome here? What's the worst thing that can happen, and can I live with that? And so I found the land, the land at Bangalow. I really, the moment I moved to Bangalow, I had faith in it as a location, because it was so central. You can get to the Gold Coast, you can get to Brisbane, you have this incredible lifestyle. And I just knew that Bangalow was going to go off. And one of my good friends said to me, when she first met me 10 years ago, I was saying, buy property here, because it's just such a livable place, and it's accessible via car, aeroplane, all those kinds of stuff. So I thought the worst case scenario is I'm going to have to sell this land, and I'm not going to lose any money. I'm going to make a little bit of money. I'll walk out.
Calculated risks.
Yeah. So really it wasn't a high risk, other than like the stress that you go through doing that. So the half house, the land was $355,000, put a $5,000 deposit down. I saved up, paid the rest of the deposit. It was all very stressful because I was waiting on my settlement with not much money to come through. But what I did is I'd learned that you can actually submit a DA before land is registered. There is a way. And so I knew that I'd already calculated that the moment that land was registered and I had to start paying, I was going to be paying rent and paying for land so I was going to be paying twice. So I submitted my DA. I submitted my DA whilst the land was still unregistered. So the moment it was registered, I was ready to go. So I did a lot of work in that time, and I investigated all kinds of scenarios. And the land was $355,000, and the bank said the maximum we will lend you is $500,000. Now that was a Newcastle permanent. I looked with all kinds of people, and it sort of varied between 460 and 490. Newcastle Permanent was the bank that would lend me the most. So how do you build a house for 155,000? And I really didn't want to build a project home because it would have been a very small, crappy project home. And anyone who knows anything about the Northern Rivers knows it's mouldy. And I wanted the house up off the ground. I wanted a little timber cottage because that's what Bangalow, that's why people pay money to go and live in Bangalow. They don't want a project home. So I sat down with a carpenter and we designed a little timber cottage, and I cut it in half and I staged the development. So I built half a house. I moved into half a house, and because I had done all this before the land was registered, I was the only one there, and people would walk past and look at it and go, what's going on there? I'll send you a photo when we're done.
We would love that.
Yeah, absolutely love that.
So I had a little half house, and I was so terrified because I was surrounded by paddocks. And then my first neighbour moved in, and they moved to Queenslander, and I was so relieved because where I'd built with my ex was surrounded by beautiful timber homes. And I was very paranoid that people would come down this street and do a whole heap of project homes. So I had this half a house. It was so expensive. I think the mortgage at the time was $620 a week. So I was just paying, and I was gaffer taping my shoes together. But again, the land at the next stage of the subdivision had started, and the land just kept going up in value. So it didn't take too long before I was able to borrow off the equity to build the second half of the house. And then I left it cut in half. So there's a door behind a cupboard, and I had a screen put on the veranda. So it's not a legal duplex. But I'm not a person who needs a lot. I work full time. I have a busy life. I don't want a big house. I've got a real issue with study nooks and things in houses that people don't use. It's one of the things about project homes that really put me off. It's just excessive consumption that you don't end up needing. And so the first part of the house, it's about 70 square meters with a nice big veranda, really simple. And the back bit is about 60 square meters. And I'm like, I'm going to live in the back bit and rent the front bit out, which is what I did. And but I've got to say, while this was all happening, before I built the back bit, I was so poor. All I could do was garden, and I planted so many plants. And while I was planting all those plants, I was listening to you guys in the podcast. So that's what I did in my garden, with very little money and a shovel.
Now, Jessie, did you always know that you were going to rent out a portion of it? Or no, was that sort of like an afterthought that just worked out really
Evolution.
well, build it in stages?
No, I thought if I do this like this, I'm going to have options, and I'm going to suffer in the meantime, but I'm going to have options. And I could open the house up and have a housemate. I could leave it cut in two. I've got options with this setup. And ultimately, it is supposed to be one house. And all I've got to do is sort of remove the screening wall from out on the veranda and put a nicer door in between the two sections, and there I go. I really love living in the back bit. Small, nice veranda. Yeah.
So you do that on a permanent basis or a short-term basis? Sounds like long-term.
No, I've moved out. I rent both of them out now, and and actually, I remember one of your first things on rent vesting. I forget the name of the guy, but it really stuck with me. I was like, yeah, okay. I'm a water baby, so I like to be close to the water, and Bangalow is actually very close to the water, but to leave before work, you have to pack your whole car with everything that you need for the entire day. And so, yeah, I'm living with a friend down in Byron and renting both half of my houses out.
Wonderful, which is spinning off a bunch of cash flow. It'd be worth touching on the fact that your mum gives you life savings, everything she's got, and takes an extraordinary amount of faith in you. That must fill you with pride to be able to go back to mum and say, thanks for backing me in. Because let me tell you a story about that one decision that you made that's set off a sliding doors moment for me. Do you get to have that reflection time?
And she's so proud of me, and I'm immensely grateful for that opportunity. Immensely grateful. It was a stroke of the stars aligning. I'm just so lucky. I just had that faith, and she believed in me. So yeah.
Yes, Jess, I can tell you my story where even still now, my mum and dad, or mainly my mum, goes, you know what you're doing? Do you know what you're doing? Like you've got a bit of debt now, Ben. Do your parents lean in on that conversation for you around? So you need another one of these, do you? Can you tell me why you need another one of these?
No, they really believe in me, and
Right.
yeah, I think they look to me as a source of
Pride,
advice and what to do. Yeah.
100%. You're got an inspiring story. Your sisters should be looking at you going, wow, she's taken some punts and it's worked out beautifully for her. But that property is now renting out. There's two, but that's not the end of the story for you. There's more. So
There is more.
talk us through, what happened after that.
Okay, so listening to you guys, doing my gardening, and I started to think about what I wanted to do for property too, and when was the right time for that. Now, in hindsight, I think property 3 is probably the one that I probably could have slowed down a little bit on, but I knew that I wanted a house that I could add value to. I knew I wanted house and land. I knew I didn't want to deal with strata or anything like that, that I wanted to keep it as simple as possible so that it was manageable and that I could add value to it. So I was looking at little houses. Again, I've got a real theme about little houses. And then I did something that I wouldn't recommend to anyone.
All right, do tell.
And I actually wondered if I should, because I can cut this bit out of the story quite easily if I needed to, but my eldest sister became incredibly unwell and it was life-threatening. It was at the beginning of this property boom during COVID, which her landlord decided to sell her house. And I had this moment driving into where my parents live. We were going to pick my sister up and she was just sitting there sobbing, and it was so devastating for me because, again, she's done nothing wrong. She's a good person. She's worked hard her whole life. She's raised a beautiful child, and here she is sitting there with not even a house to go to. So I thought, well, I know of my 3 sisters. I hope they don't ever listen to this. I wouldn't do it for the other 2. But this sister, I thought, well, maybe I'll buy a house and she can be my tenant because I know exactly what she's like. She pays, she looks after the house, she works. There's no issue with that. I guess the risk for me in that was that she could become unwell and have to go, not be able to work. She's had half of her insides cut out. It was quite a thing to live through. And then what I learned in that, I'm looking at these houses going, well, I can't value add to them because she's not going to be able to afford it. I can't just renovate that or add a room on here, there or anywhere, because then what's the point of that? She's going to end up in the same situation just a couple of years down the track. And then I started looking at building again and replicating what I'd done in Bangalow with the 2 sides of the house. And that was really tricky. And there were so many issues with it. And again, that double pain in the bit where you're building. And then I came across this tiny little 1-bedroom house on a 420 square metre block, gorgeous, beautiful garden. And I'm not really an aggressive person, but I went hard, and that's the house that I bought. And it's been an absolute winner. One, she's an excellent tenant. We have a 3-year lease. The next lease I'll do with her, I'll do a really long lease. I like long leases. I don't want to be dealing with tenants every 6 months. I'm a big fan of, rather than changing, to go for that extra money. I like the stability that suits me. And she pays, and she lives in the tiny little 1-bedroom house, and I have had plans drawn up to add a second bedroom to it, which are just sitting there waiting for me to do the DA. And yeah, and it's just really performed as a property. Aside from that, it's in an area where there's nowhere else to grow, there's nowhere else to go, and it's got lots of nice little timber cottages in it, and it's an area where people are buying and renovating, and the growth there has been obviously bumped along by COVID, but what I've noticed there in comparison to other areas, it hasn't really dropped off. Like, I haven't seen a steep decline in the property around, so it's been a great little house, and it's one that I locked in on a fixed interest rate, interest only for 2.49, doesn't come up to 2025. So
savvy.
Yeah.
That one's good.
Which part of that story is the bit where you say you wouldn't recommend it? Because
don't buy a house for your siblings.
Oh, gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah, don't buy a house for your siblings.
Gotcha.
Now, Jess, is there a chance there where your sister might be able to also save and get a deposit maybe for a flat or something like that down the track? So she also has her own property. Like, can you coach her or guide her in that story?
Yeah, I think for her, and this is one of the most powerful things that you guys have given me, and I imagine a lot of listeners out there. She doesn't necessarily want to own a property, and there's a lot of fear involved in that concept. I would 100% support her to save up to buy a little flat if that's what she wanted to do. But at this point in her life, I don't know if she's in a place where she's ready for that kind of personal transformation. And I think when you're coming from where we have, that's actually what this is. It's not just a financial transformation. It's a whole person transformation.
Yeah, understood. So, I mean, ultimately, if that is the case, and if you're having that conversation with your sister, the super is the alternative, right? Because obviously that's in terms of the biggest challenge segment of our society financially, it's 50-something females. Single 50-something females, right? They are the one who are the most challenged in terms of not being able to financially support themselves. So whether it's, again, getting an asset that builds value over time in property, or it's, basically focusing on and getting that super momentum and that compounding, getting to a stage where she's got a little bit of a nest egg, whether it's in bricks and mortar or whether it's, elsewhere, is still really important that, you can hopefully pay that forward for her.
And she's in a position now where she's able to save, and that one feels pretty good. And
right.
I'm happy, very happy with the outcome on both a financial and a family personal level.
It's more than money on that one, isn't it? That's there's some heart and emotion in that. So you got this property, 2 incomes, then you buy one, 420 square meters, 1 bed, sister lives in it. Is this the end of the property story?
No.
What happened next?
Well, then, okay, so COVID was happening, and I've learned from you guys and the stuff that I've read that property is a long game, and it's, if I wanted something more immediate, then maybe I would dabble in shares, which is not really my style, because I understand my weekly income and how that works and how this works over a long period of time. And I did some projections about what it would look like waiting and what it wouldn't look like waiting. And because of my debt to income ratio, which is like right up there, as I'm sure you can imagine, I'm kind of restricted. So I've got plenty of equity. I think there's about 450,000 of equity in the Bangalow property, and a fair bit in Talara as well. Like, the mortgage is 279, and I think it would sell at market for 480, maybe even a little bit more. So I've got plenty of equity, but I also have this huge debt, and rather than people looking at me going, oh, you've got no children, you own your car, I can pay my credit card off tomorrow if I need to, I don't have an exorbitant lifestyle, they'd see that big debt and go, red lights. I'm not in mortgage stress. If I was in mortgage stress, I know what I know what I can do to bring that under control. I know what my worst case scenarios are. So I started looking. And I looked in regional off the coast areas in Queensland and Victoria. I almost bought another 1-bedroom house in Wangaratta in Victoria. And I got outbid, and I went to Toowoomba. I looked at Armidale, Bathurst, and lots of areas like that, because my borrowing capacity was around the 300,000 mark. And I was just really dissatisfied with what those areas had to offer. Meanwhile, people are starting to go crazy, and I didn't have FOMO, but I went, if I do nothing now and wait 2 or 3 years, my situation, my borrowing capacity was going to remain about the same based off those projections. Even paying my mortgage down, I was still going to, because the price of property is going to go up, even though I owe less than my mortgage, I was going to come out the other side the same. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to look for unregistered land. I'm going to try and see if I can do another bungalow. And so I started looking for unregistered land on the east side of the Pacific Highway, and started honing in on areas around there. And I've secured a block of land with the deposit bond, so I haven't actually paid anything. I've paid the stamp duty in Nantucket Heads. Nantucket Heads, I'm going to say it's not an A-grade property area yet, but it's half an hour from Coffs Harbour. Coffs Harbour Airport is growing. They've just opened this big industrial development on the south side of Coffs Harbour. They are just skyrocketing, and people have got need somewhere to go that's affordable. So I've sort of realised if I'd had more money, I would have gone to Valor Beach, but I was, always going to be priced out of Valor Beach. But I think Nambucca's, and if not, well, we'll see what happens. I've got the block of land on the market. If it sells, it sells. If it doesn't, I will have to build something, and I'll probably build a small project home. I may go down the path of looking at having it sort of NDIS, wide, that kind of thing, just because, Nambucca is a retirement town. And I could also go down the path of doing another 2-stage development, just keeping it really, really simple. Because the one thing I've learned about that is that if you've got elderly parents or someone who needs to be looked after, but you don't want to live together, but you really, need to live together, it's a niche market, but there's definitely some benefits to that. And it gets
over the next 20 years, it's not going to be a niche market. It's going to be a prime market for those baby boomers who are pushing through that sort of 70 through to 90 years of age.
Yeah.
And they're the retirees that are pushing demand into those areas. And you're right. The health needs and requirements of those people, and the care requirements needs of those people, based on the back of obviously what we're seeing with the federal government support around aged care and, potentially lifting the wages in that aged care area. You think over time, progress, population growth and all that, it'll get a ripple effect into that particular location. There's no doubt.
And look, if you look at it now, on the face of it, it looks pretty rough. There's a bit of housing commission there, but it's too close to the water.
Yeah.
It's too close to the water, and it's too close to Coffs Harbour. Coffs Harbour, if you're a police officer or a nurse, there's a university there. It's quite a significant regional hub, and I only think that's going to grow. So I've got faith in Nambucca. It may not be, it won't be Bangalow.
It's a long-term play.
But it's a long-term play. And meanwhile, the land is still unregistered, and I've paid the stamp duty. I've paid the deposit with the deposit. I haven't paid the deposit. I've paid with a deposit bond, which I think cost me $1,100. So if they go down the sunset clause date of backing out, which I don't think they will, but if they did, I haven't the worst case scenario I can deal with. I can deal with the worst case scenario.
I think the important thing here is you're just progressing your journey and you're navigating based on your, you talked about your DTI, and then so what did that mean for you? And you didn't leave that, let that be inertia for you. So my question for you, and I've got a couple of quick fire questions for you as we work towards the end, but what's the goal? Like, you started out with a $5,000 deposit from mum just to get yourself on the ladder, but now you're becoming a sophisticated investor who's now starting to, there's nothing, you're in the same state, but you're still embracing borderless by, I'm not just buying in my own suburb. I'm prepared to go further south down the coast and try different things. What's the goal? What are you aiming for? What's the pot at the end of the rainbow for you?
Okay, well, there's a few things there in terms of like, I'd like to retire well and sort of be able to always support my family. That's really important to me. The big thing that's going to throw a bit of a spanner in this for me is that I have a fantastic job. I get paid every fortnight. I've been teaching for 10 years. I'm in a leadership position. It's very stable. It's very consistent. You know what's going to happen. It's easy to do mathematical calculations and projections off that. You can forecast. But I actually would like to change my whole life quite significantly. I'm halfway through a law degree, which has been very difficult. And I know that I want to work in the property space somewhere. I didn't know that before I started this journey, and I think you guys have definitely inspired me there. I love building. I don't recommend building for everyone, but more than building, I'm actually interested in housing and what we do moving forward as a society. I listened to the podcast you had with our Premier, and it was interesting. Like, I wanted to say things to him about that, because if we want to work with the housing issue, you have to build more houses. It's as simple as that. There's not enough houses. We're not ever going to fix housing affordability, but we have so much riding on the back of people owning property and their wealth through property. And it's historic. And it's not just historic from Australia. It comes from England. It comes from our legal system that was brought here when the British colonised Australia. So to turn that ship around is such a mammoth task. And there's a lot of vested interests in not turning it around. But I do think we need to think differently about it. And I think we need to think differently about medium density. I'm a big fan of medium density. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Habitat. I'm not getting paid to say anything about Habitat, but as a concept, it's fantastic because you've got that mixed use. People can have an office downstairs, live upstairs. There's a shared pool, there's a shared area. I'm sure the strata fees there are really expensive. But I think moving forwards that it's a really fantastic option, and we need more of that. If you don't go up, you go out. So I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but there's also an environmental impact, and why are we building on really good farmland and stuff like that? So my bigger picture goals is to move somewhere into that space, but the transition is going to be tricky because I've got I've got a lot of balls in the air at the moment. Yeah. So
I'll just give you one small thing. Can you just make lands titles universal across Australia? Let's just start with the easy one.
Yeah, I'm starting. I'll do property law and conveyancing next year. Hopefully, if I can squeeze it in. And I think there's a lot of issues with.
It's massive. I
don't think for ages about
that's not going to change in my lifetime, I don't think. But back to your point around co-share living, that is going to be in the mix. I mean, ultimately, as we evolve as a society and our population grows, there will be, those people who enjoy that co-share living, and that's going to be in the mix. There's build to rent that's going to start to come into the mix. So, yeah, I mean, I do predict that, in terms of private ownership of rental dwellings will actually be on the decrease rather than on the increase, the way in which the government agenda is playing out right now. So, yeah, and it's happening already. We're actually seeing less and less property investors are actually, based on the tenancy reforms and everything that's been going on, a lot of people are just saying it's just not worth it in terms of doing that. So if that continues on, then you're going to see the big end of town get into that particular space. So it's definitely going to be a growing space from a law point of view. So I don't think you'll struggle in terms of finding opportunities from whether it be conveyancing, land titles through to, as you're sort of talking about, they're more sort of productive, better use and legislation around sort of, how we change zoning to accommodate.
I could talk to you about zoning forever. I really, it's bizarre.
Yes.
But I think zoning is a joke, and the Local Government Act and the development process. I know they've reformed in New South Wales. They've reformed the law so many times, and it's still such a mess. And still, you see developments get through that should not get through, and yet
vested interest.
Trying to do something really simple,
Yeah.
can't get it through. So yeah, there's a lot there I could talk about, but that's not why I'm here. So
No, that's all good.
Well,
that's a good goal.
Yeah. Well, there is a bunch that we could talk about. I've been fascinated by the conversation and really enjoying it. There's a couple of quick ones I want to fire at you, Jessica. One is, how do you feel about the sentiment in the market right now around rising interest rates? How is that impacting your psyche and your portfolio?
Okay, so I always knew that interest rates were going to go up because they were at a historic low, and I was lucky that when I jumped in, it was low because it did give me more capacity to do stuff. Personally, I'm still positively geared. The property in Talara, that will change once the fixed interest rate goes up. But Bangalow will probably become negative geared in the next interest rate rise. I'm not worried about it because I expected it. I kind of thought, when you do the worst case scenario thing, you really think about what is the worst thing that could happen. And I think that will settle in the population. I think people will settle and readjust to interest rates being higher. They couldn't stay at that rate. And I think in some ways a bit of damage was done by having them so low for such a prolonged period of time. I understand that there was reasons for that, and I'm not an economist, so I'm probably talking out of school a little bit there, but I'm not worried about the interest rates. For me personally, I knew that they were going to go up. And I think that everyone else will settle down when they come to accepting that that's where it is. You just have to reconfigure you can have the same plan. It just needs to shift a little bit to cater for that. And like you guys say, I rang up my bank and say, is that the best you can do? Because otherwise I'll go somewhere else. And I went to refinance once, and I've never had so many phone calls from them, and I ended up with a really fantastic.
Good old retention team kicking in there. Hey, Jess, does further rate rises or one or two more rate rises tap you out on Project 3 build? Like, how does that?
Well, that will be very interesting. That will be interesting then to see what happens there. It could have an impact, definitely.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to, I feel like I can't, all I can do is look at the possible scenarios and be prepared. But until the land's registered and I have to make a choice, make a decision, and I'm going to probably go down the path, if it hasn't sold closer to when I think it's going to register, I'll go down the path of trying to do all the DA and that stuff so that, I hit the ground running, because that period of double paying is not very nice, and that'll hurt.
When do you think the registration of the land might pull through?
Oh, that's an interesting question, because they always like to say, and when I ring, I'm like, just tell me what it is. I don't care if it's 2 years away. I just want to know.
Yeah.
Oh, no. In 4 weeks' time, we're laying the tarmac. And I went, last time I drove down to see my family, I went past and I'm like, this is nowhere near ready.
Yeah.
They hadn't, where my block is, that they were still putting in the services. And so then the agent rang me and said there was some kind of problem with drainage. And I thought, okay.
Oh.
It's annoying in the sense that it's stopped me from doing anything else, but also I know that my borrowing capacity wasn't going to change dramatically, and also even if property prices stabilise now and come down a little bit, it doesn't help me at all.
But you'll be able to settle on the land, I suspect, based on your borrowing capacity now, so that buys you a bit more time anyway. Before,
buys me a bit more time.
Yeah. Okay.
It's gone up in 100,000. So if I walk away and if I sell it and I walk away, I'll think, well, I didn't do too much in that time, but the worst case scenario is not so bad.
Yeah.
My final two for you. The first one's a quick one. Who do you get to talk to in your networks about property, if you do? And the final one is, we put the call out, Jessica, to come on to this podcast, and a lot of people get that little niggle that says, "Yeah, I want to do that," but then they don't put their hand up. And before we started recording, you were a little nervous. Why did you put yourself through that? Why did you come in? So first one is, who do you get to chat about in your networks? And two, why did you come on?
Okay, so number one, I don't get to chat to enough people about it, and I bore people, and people often, tell me what I believe is incorrect information, and, I'm an evil landlord, and if we're in communist China, I'd be in serious trouble. But I guess that's why I listen to the podcast, because I feel like it's not a two-way engagement, and anyone who'll talk to me about it, I'll talk about it. But I don't have I have someone who's done a bit of mentoring with me who is good, but he's hard to access on a regular basis. That's something that I think is important, actually, and I could probably work on trying to find someone to talk about more often.
Yep.
And then, okay, for the people who are out there going, oh, maybe, I hope that there's other people who've come from I haven't come from any money. Nothing's ever been given to me. And it's possible, you can do it. And the stories that people come on and share might touch someone. So there could be someone else out there listening. And I really encourage women and single women, because, we're underrepresented, I don't mean that I know that men have their own challenges, but I think that if someone can be inspired to come on, and I loved listening to your summer series. I loved it. I love listening to people's stories and what they did. And, I remember one guy saying something about, oh, that's right, he and his wife had two of everything. They brought their own stuff. And you guys were saying what you were saying. I'm thinking, that's brilliant. That
was Brendan. That was back in the very first summer series.
Oh, that was so good. And another one was the credit card, because we haven't talked about that much now. All my money goes into offset accounts, and then I have a very similar system to the Money Smarts. But as another guy said, everything goes off the credit card. And Ben, I couldn't see Ben, but I could feel.
You're feeling bristle, yeah.
And I will say for all the people out there listening that I really believe in the Money Smart system. Makes it very, very achievable, particularly if you can deal with the delayed gratification and whatnot. So
now, anyway, Jess, you give me an opportunity to then, sort of talk about how that it's now mobile ready. So you can download it and it's on the mobile. So there you go. So thank you for that little clue to put a little segue in there, but we launched it on our final episode at the end of November, and now it's actually up and running. So that's terrific. So It gives me a little plug for the download the app from the iTunes store or for the Android store.
And look, before you finish, I do want to really thank you guys for this, because it's so hard to learn this stuff when you just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And I really appreciate the time and effort that you put into offering people free financial education. And I think it's been a really big contribution to a wide community. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I was going to say to you, we're privileged that our property and our business provides us, so we don't have to turn the podcast into a commercial opportunity. So thank you for saying that, because it's something that Ben and I definitely wanted to provide as a legacy piece to share what we've known, and then people can hear these concepts, and in 10 and 15 years, the podcasts that come out should be way better, because then they had us as a foundation, and then they could take it to another level. And so we'll get a real sense of joy out of that. But I also want to say thanks to you for putting your hand up, because as I was throwing it out there to people to come on, you may or may not remember I said, ladies, please come on. I know we're a couple of footy loving bullheads, but we do really like this conversation we've had with you has been so engaging and so incredible and very inspiring. And I love the fact that you came from nothing. I love the fact that you backed yourself in. I love the fact that we had a little joke around, assembling the plane on the way down. And you very carefully said, no, I didn't jump off the cliff. It was, it was there was calculated moves that you made. And I 100% agree that you've been very calculated in everything you've done. But just to hear your story and just to hear the nuances of the story and to hear how you hurt your sister and how it was the 5,000 from your mum and there was stress responses from those things are amazing. I love it when the ladies put their hands up. Thank you for putting your hand up. And there is stuff in here that people will be able to take away. But I think the main takeaway from me, and I could rattle off a heap of, to borrow Ben's term, if it's to be, it's up to me. You just cut your own path, and it's been a really incredible. So thank you for the feedback, but thank you for putting your hand up. I'm personally, I know Ben, I speak for him as well. We're just grateful that you did that, because it is nervy. Everyone who comes on this, they get nervous, and then there's a common thread when we're about to push record, and they go, geez, this morning I woke up and I just didn't know why I put my hand up to do this. What was I thinking? But gee whiz, we're
stoked.
I'm super stoked. Ben.
No, that's right. I mean, Jess, you're a testimony to, again, your situation could have gone in a different direction, but you took charge of your life. You went to university at a later stage. You built an education platform that allowed you to get an income based on your mind and what you create and how you add value. And as a teacher, I mean, we have the utmost respect for teachers, because ultimately, they're educating the next generation, which is going to take this, country forward. So that's, that in itself. And it's a testimony to single people, teacher. So you're doing a community service. You're not earning the big incomes. There's a great story here that people need to understand. So some people will choose to play, no action. I couldn't do it. But your mindset is one of action and accomplishment. And so for that, I commend you highly for what you've been able to achieve so far. And I look forward to checking in on the story in about 12 months' time to see what happened.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Mate, talk about action-oriented and at times just operating in faith. I mean, it's just another example. Like, you don't need to read all the books in the library on property investing, because what happens is you just need to know enough at the beginning to get started, and then just let action do a lot of the work for you. And you can see from Jessica's story here that she let her circumstances meet where she was at, took action, and then looked for creative ways to leverage an income situation that, self-disclosed by her wasn't, super high, and made it work.
Yeah, look, I mean, I look at this in a couple of parts. The first one is in the earlier days, she, that comment around hating asking for money because she just knew that things weren't great. Obviously, inside that household, it was a blended household. So savings became an important part, and she learnt how the delayed gratification, the horse story, in terms of what that looked like. So for me, she built a tremendous money independence mindset that if it was to be, it was up to me, and she'd learnt how to do that. So that's stage one. Then we, that money evolution then turns into money management. So, don't borrow money for cars, always looking at worst outcomes. So doing cash flow modeling. And my other one was sort of the creative nature in terms of how she made it work, i.e., building a house with two sides to allow additional income to come in. I mean, single woman, making it very empowering in terms of what she's doing for herself. And the story is a transformation story now where she's got choices. And part of what she's now interested in doing is to obviously look at changing her career. She's now got a passion for property. So she's looking at exploring that. And look, she wouldn't have been able to done what she did without either finding out the knowledge for herself or getting professional help to help her. She found out those regulations around being able to build or get started, and the planning permits and so forth. So that it's just a testimony to who she is and how she operates. So,
but I think that shows, Ben, too, that she actually is in the doing, right?
Yes.
And then from there, just starts ferreting and getting the information, because it's all applying to the doing rather than the theorizing around what it should be. So I think there's two very good points there. The action taking and then the fastidiousness around understanding what to do once you have that action. I still never get sick of asking the very first question we always ask, Ben, is how was the money conversation over the dinner table? Because the quote was terrible at managing money. And when they thought about that money, it became really stressful. So it's interesting to see some of these early forming paradigms around money, but what sort of leverage that's provided for Jessica to go, okay, I don't want that in my world. I'm going to use that as a platform for me to actually navigate this so I don't actually have that problem under my own roof. And I think it's a credit to her. She's clearly articulate. She's very, very sharp and switched on. So I think the results are really a reflection of someone who's an action taker.
Yeah, and she's going to now have to make some other choices. She's got a few ideas about what she wants to do. So it's about how she sequences those and how she thinks about the cash flow impacts and all of that as well. So being able to sort of think about that and plan those potential scenarios is going to help her reduce any risk of mistake. Because obviously from that point of view, it's all looking really good at the moment. So I really love that sort of moving forward mindset that she's been able to create for herself. And it sort of, it speaks a lot about what we're trying to do with the Moorr platform as well, in terms of trying to get that sort of understanding. So a little, reminder for people, if you're not sure about where those cash flows are at, if you're not sure about where things are going, get organised, jump on the new mobile version of the Moorr platform, or obviously you've got the web version as well. So it's a super platform, and that's going to be part of our core motivations, being able to sort of see people like Jessica who says, right, I need a savings program. You can do that. I need to be able to get motivated, get organised. You can do that, and you can keep your learning in terms of, because money is the critical part of that story. So that's what I love about Jessica's story.
And Ben, a little shout out to Jessica's mum. So if she's listening to this, you're a legend. You lent her $5,000 to kick all this off, and that was almost all of what you had at the time. So that is incredible faith in your daughter. So well done. But Jessica, great story. Thanks for coming on and sharing it with our community. If people can't have at least one takeaway from your story, they weren't listening hard enough. But I reckon there'll be multiple takeaways from the story that you just shared. So Ben, it's an incredible time of the year for you and me. We get to get the front row seat of some of the best stories across Australia right here on the Property Couch. But mate, until next week and the next story in the series.
This is another example, Bryce, of taking action, because your future self will thank you for it.
There you go, folks. See you next week.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1, because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, you will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you, because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management, so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. But folks, I want to encourage you again to go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up right away.